Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we will continue with our study of the book of Shmuel, that is the Shmuel Aleph, this book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel. And we will be studying chapter 4 today. We completed chapter 3, learning of the um, inauguration of a new prophet, the prophet Samuel, who was studying and being raised by Eli the high priest in the tabernacle in Shiloh. We learned of the corruption and oppressive regime of Eli's sons, Hophni and Pinchas, and their family. We learned how Eli was not able or not willing, or more likely just chose to turn a blind eye for the most part to his children's behavior. And the how and during all of this corruption, we learned of how they, because of their behavior and oppression, they turned the people's hearts away from God. And however, despite all of that bleak news, we also heard of um, the growth of Shmuel, how Shmuel had God had appeared to him, and how he had started he started to prophecy, and he started to teach the people the proper path. Now, in the next few chapters, we are going to learn of the demise and the end of the family of Eli's reign over the people, and the demise of the two sons of Eli, and the demise of Eli himself. I'm giving you a little heads up as to what's to come, and eventually um, we will learn of how Shmuel took over the leadership and started to bring the people back towards God. Now, one of the things that the underlying theme of the next few chapters that I really want to point out, and I want you to pay attention to, is the theme and the idea of not venerating objects, right? In other words, the idea that a form, an object, a statue, is not something that has any inherent power or any inherent holiness. And this goes for objects that are supposed to represent idols, but it even goes for objects that are supposed to represent more holy things, such as the Ark of the Covenant. The story of the Ark, which we're about to read, is going to bring that out. Now, under the leadership of Eli and the leadership of Hophni and Pinchas, the people were of the idea that the Ark was somehow godly, had some power in it of itself, that the object itself had some power, as opposed to the fact that that it was just a representation of, if anything, of a spiritual idea. But remember, the ark was supposed to be placed in the Holy of Holies, and no one is supposed to see it. It's supposed to be hidden away, because God does not want us to worship objects. God does not want us to assume and think and believe and live our lives as if objects had any power. Objects have no power. And this is going to be the lesson of the next few chapters, that both a lesson for the Jewish people not to put their faith in things, but rather in God himself, and a lesson to the Gentile people, in this case the Philistines, not to think that their gods have any power, that their gods, that the statues that they worship and believe in have any power. There's other ways. A lot of people read this as if it's trying to teach you that the ark was somehow more powerful than the Philistine idols. But and you'll see what I mean as we go through this, but that's a huge mistake, because we will find that it is God that's running the show, and the point of these chapters is to demonstrate that it is God, only God, that runs the show. And to the extent that you put your faith in objects, whether it's the ark or the statues of pagan gods, um, regardless of which object it is you put your faith in, ultimately you're going to end meeting with destruction. The only path, and the path that Shmuel is going to teach us after all of the destruction that we're going to read about in the next few chapters, the only path is the path of believing in God himself, and in trusting in God himself, and in serving God himself by living the kind of life that God wants us to live. This is the basics of ethical monotheism. That is the message of the entire Torah, which and as we read through the prophets, we see this message developing further and further and further, and getting more deeply explained and more deeply expressed by each successive prophet as we go through the prophets. And Shmuel, of course, was a major one in this direction. So Vayihi Dvar Shmuel L'chol Yisrael. In the first verse, we're reminded. First verse of this chapter, we're reminded that the word of Shmuel was going towards all of Israel. All of Israel heard the word of Shmuel. Shmuel's teachings were beginning to spread. However, we're going to put Shmuel aside for the rest of the chapter. Shmuel is there. We're reminded that he's there. However, the people are still being led by Eli and his son's family. Vayetze Yisrael ikras Plishtim, and the people of Israel went to encounter the Philistines. This is the encounters between the Israelites and the Philistines already started in the book of Judges. We heard about their encounters, and these wars will continue until several generations into the future. Now, so they set out to wage war against the Philistines, La Milchama, Vayachanu al Even Ezer, and they camped at the Even Ha'ezer, the stone. Literally, Ha'ezer means of the help. That this, as if this stone, again, emphasizing that idea that the people believed that there was some kind of power in this stone that was going to somehow help them. Doesn't specify exactly what the stone was, but regardless, it is the stone that would somehow help them. And the Philistines camped in Afek. The Philistines were people that came via the sea. They were known as sea people. They had come, we now know from archaeological evidence and even genetic evidence that the Philistines originated in the European areas bordering on the Mediterranean, so from Greece and Iberian Peninsula, other places so they were essentially Europeans who had come across the Mediterranean by ship, settled, and eventually settled in five main towns, which we're going to read about along the southern coast of what's now modern Israel and Gaza. And those five towns were Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gat. Many of these are familiar names even today. Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza are still towns that are roughly at the same locations that the Philistines had settled back then. Ashdod and Ashkelon in Israel, Gaza and the Gaza Strip, and and Ekron and Gat is a town in Israel today, but it's probably not at the same location. Archaeologically, Gat has been identified somewhere else, and Ekron is also is a little bit harder to identify, but so on. And regardless, those were the five towns. The Philistines were living there, and they were starting to encounter and move more inward and get into these battles with the people of Israel, who are settled more farther inland. Israel, and the Philistines arrayed themselves in battle against the people of Israel. Vatitosh hamilchama, and the battle was fought. Vayinogev Yisrael lifnei Plishtim, and the people of Israel were struck down in front of the Philistines. Remember, they were camped at this Even Ha'ezer, the stone that was somehow going to help them, but it obviously didn't help them. Vayakub v'maracha basodek ka'arba'as alofim ish, and they were struck down in the battle, in the formations of battle. Approximately 4,000 soldiers were killed. So this was a terrible defeat. So Vayavoho Amel Amachna, they came back to their base camp. Vayomru Ziknei Yisrael, and the elders of Israel said, Lama nagafnu Adonai hayom lifnei Plishtim. Why did God strike us down before the Philistines? So, and then their answer is very telling. Instead of thinking we should pray, we should fast, we should improve our ways, we should improve our lives, improve who we are in order to gain the favor of God, rather let's do something else. We need more magical powers. Nikcha Eleinu mishilo, let us take to us from Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, at Aron Brit Adonai, the ark of the covenant of God, v'yavo b'kerbenu, and he meaning He, God, will come among us because we now have the ark, V'yoshienu mikaf oyevenu, and He will save us. This He also could be referring to the ark itself. But either way, they think that somehow they will be saved from their enemies because they have the ark with them. That somehow the presence of the ark was going to magically save them. So, Vayishlach Am Shiloh, the people sent messengers, they sent a delegation to Shiloh, Vayisu Misham et Aron Brit Adonai, and they carried from there the Ark of the Covenant of God, Tzvaot, to the God, Lord of Hosts, Yoshev Akruvim, the one who resides among the cherubs being the angelic figures that stood atop the ark. V'sham Shnei Bnei Eli, and there at Shiloh, when they carried it, they took the two sons of Eli were taken in Maron Bris Elohim. They accompanied with the Ark of the Covenant of God, Chafni and Pinchas, the two sons Chafni and Pinchas, who were the corrupt guys who we read about before. Vayehi, and it was Kivo Aron Brit Adonai Elamach. When the Ark of the Covenant of God came to the camp, Vayariu Chol Yisrael Tru Agedola Vatehom Haaretz, and all of Israel were made a tremendous amount of noise and celebration, a great call or shouting, and the land was resonated with this tremendous amount of sound, of noise and celebration that the people made. So the people were in tremendous awe. Now we have God with us. Vayishma'u Philistim and Kol Atruah. The Philistines heard all of this sound. Vayomer, and they said, Me Kol Hatruah Hagadolah Hazos b'Machaneh Ha'Ivrim. What is this sound, this tremendous noise that is coming from the camp of the Hebrews? Vayedu, and they knew. So, and then they found out. So someone told them, Ki Aron Adonai ba el Machaneh. The ark of God has come to the camp. Now remember, the Philistines were just as superstitious as the people of Israel. Who was more superstitious? Who knows? But so now they're scared too. Vayiru haplishtim. This is verse 7. The Philistines were afraid, ki amru, because they said, Ba Elohim ala machaneh. God has come to the camp. Vayomru, and they said, Oy lanu, woe is to us. Ki lo haisa kazoset mososom. We didn't have this last time and the time before that and previous times. We didn't have their God with them. So immediately the Philistines identified the ark with God, just as the Jews said, God is the one who resides among the cherubs, and therefore now we have God with us, as if the way of bringing God was to bring this object. So the Philistines continued in verse 8, Oilonu, woe is to us, mi atzilenu, who's going to save us, miad ho Elohim ho adirim ho elef, from this great and powerful God. Elohim ho Elohim, this is the God hamakim et Mitzrayim, and they're saying God in the plural language, as if this God is powerful like many gods. This is the one who struck the Egyptians down, b'chol makkah, with all kinds of plagues, bamidbar, in the wilderness. We know the plagues from the Exodus story they were well known around the world, and it was well known that the Israelites, God struck the Egyptians and freed the Israelites from Egypt. This is something the Philistines would have known very well about, and therefore now they're thinking, their God is with them. Now we're in deep trouble. His chazku, but their reaction was not to run and flee. Rather, their reaction was to strengthen themselves. Be strong. You should be like men, you Philistines. That's what they said to each other. Penta Avdullah Ivrim, because we're afraid that you're going to end up becoming subservient to the Hebrews. Kasher Avdulachem, just like they were subservient to us, they're going to take revenge and do that to us now. Act like men, v'nilchamtem, and fight strong. Be men and fight strong. And then what happened? Vayilachamu Philistим. The Philistines waged war by Yinogef Israel, and they struck down the Israelites. Vayanusu Ishla Ohalav, and the people of Israel all ran back home. They retreated and ran helter skelter back to their homes. And ran from the battle. Bati Hamaka Hagidolah Gidolah Miod, and the defeat of the people of Israel was tremendous. Vayipolmi Israel, and of the Israelite soldiers there died Shloshim Elef Ragli, 30,000 foot soldiers had passed away from this. Varon Elohim, and the ark of God Nilkach was taken captive. Ushnei bnei Eli, and the two sons of Eli who were accompanying the ark Mesu were put to death. Chafni and Pinchas, those were Chafni and Pinchas. Now I'm going to stop here at the end of this disaster, but remember the story here is being the first they had faith in Iraq, didn't help, right? In fact, they got punished, right? And then they had faith in the ark of God, and in terms of its use in battle, it was even worse than the rock. Certainly not more helpful than the rock. When you put faith in an object, when you think that having some kind of magical object is somehow going to save you, God says, no, that's not going to work. You need to have faith in me. Thank you so much for studying this together with me today. Looking forward to finishing chapter 4 in the next podcast, and of course the rest of the book of Samuel.